The corridor outside the briefing chamber smelled faintly of ionized metal, and something sharper that Marcus had learned was the natural scent of Veyra's people. Clean, almost medicinal, with an edge that made human sinuses complain. He stood where he had been told to stand, boots aligned with a glowing floor seam that pulsed softly, as if reminding him that even the ship's architecture was alive and impatient. Around him, Queen Veyra's elite soldiers gathered in loose, confident clusters. They were tall, long-eared, their posture effortless in a way that made gravity seem optional. Their armor followed the elegant logic of alien engineering: smooth surfaces, shifting glyphs, and energy fields that adjusted themselves before a blow could even land. Marcus's own gear, by comparison, looked like it had been assembled by a committee that hated beauty but loved redundancy. One of the soldiers glanced at him, eyes lingering on Marcus's exposed joints, the visible seams in his armor. "Is that all the protection your people require?" the alien asked, voice polite enough to pass his curiosity. Marcus smiled faintly. "We rely heavily on optimism." The soldier blinked, long ears twitching, then turned away, apparently unsure whether he had been insulted. It wasn't the first joke Marcus had made since boarding the ship. It wasn't the first time it had failed. Humor, he was learning, translated poorly across species, especially when the joke was yourself. The doors to the briefing chamber parted without a sound. Inside, the room curved upward like the inside of a shell, holographic star maps floating at the center. Queen Veyra stood at the far end, taller than any of her soldiers, her long ears adorned with thin bands of silver that caught the light. She did not wear a crown. Power, in her culture, did not need decoration. Marcus took his place at the edge of the room. No one objected. No one acknowledged him either, which was almost worse. The scouting mission was outlined in precise, elegant terms: a hostile zone, unstable terrain, enemy forces of uncertain number. The elite troops nodded along, already imagining success. Marcus listened more closely to what wasn't said: the gaps in the projections, the assumptions baked into the plan. The terrain data flickered oddly, as if embarrassed by its own incompleteness. When the floor opened to questions, one of the soldiers laughed softly. "If the humans wish to observe from orbit, this would be an excellent learning opportunity." Marcus raised a hand, slowly, deliberately. Queen Veyra's gaze shifted to him for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, not unkind but distant. "You have something to add, infantryman Marcus?" "Yes, Your Majesty," he said, resisting the urge to salute too enthusiastically. "Just a small thing. The gravity fluctuations in that region, if they spike the way they did last cycle, heavy armor could become enthusiastic about sinking." There was a pause. A few soldiers exchanged amused looks. "Our armor compensates," one of them said. "Of course," Marcus replied. "Human armor just trips and complains." A couple of ears flicked. Queen Veyra studied the hologram again, then nodded once. "Noted," she said, in the tone of someone carefully placing a useless object on a shelf. The dropship descent was smooth until it wasn't. The planet below was a patchwork of half-finished terraforming, jagged stone breaking through engineered planes, gravity pockets shimmering like heat haze. The elite troops deployed in perfect formation, landing with practiced grace. Marcus landed a second later, boots skidding slightly. "Textbook?" he muttered, adjusting his balance. "Lovely place you've picked." The first contact came faster than expected. Energy fire lit the ruins, bright and chaotic. Veyra's soldiers surged forward with confidence, their movements powerful, precise, and then abruptly uneven as the ground shifted beneath them. One moment they were advancing, the next they were fighting gravity itself. Marcus ducked behind a fractured pillar as debris floated, then slammed down again. His suit warned him of stress fractures. He ignored it. He was good at ignoring things that complained. "Flank left," someone shouted in the alien tongue. Marcus peeked out, eyes scanning angles rather than targets. The enemy moved predictably, too predictably. He tapped into a local conduit, rerouted a bit of power, and watched a section of ground collapse exactly where he'd hoped. "Oops," he said, not very loudly. The mission unraveled with alarming speed. What had been an advance became a struggle, then a withdrawal. Queen Veyra's voice cut through the chaos, calm but sharp, ordering retreat. Drop ships descended under fire. Marcus saw the gap before anyone else did, a stretch of ruined ground that, if left uncovered, would allow the enemy to pour through and follow the retreating troops straight to extraction. He opened a channel. "Your Majesty." "Yes," Veyra replied, already moving toward evacuation coordinates. "I can stay." There was a fraction of a second of silence, long enough for several soldiers to laugh. "Alone?" one asked. Marcus glanced at the shifting battlefield, at the gravity spikes and narrow corridors. "I won't be alone," he said. "I'll have the terrain. It's very unfriendly." Queen Veyra hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her expression. Then she nodded. "Hold as long as you can." Marcus closed the channel. "No pressure," he told himself, as the dropships lifted away and the battlefield grew suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. He checked his ammo, his suit, his surroundings. "All right," he said, voice echoing in the ruins. "Let's disappoint some people." And when the enemy surged forward, expecting an easy victory over the so-called weak human, Marcus smiled grimly and began to rearrange their expectations, one small, stubborn decision at a time. Silence after retreat was never truly silent. Marcus knew that. The battlefield breathed, gravity humming unevenly, fragments of stone drifting upward only to fall again with lazy menace. He stayed still for a full minute after the dropships vanished, counting his breaths, letting the enemy convince themselves he was either dead or panicking. Humans, he had learned, were very good at waiting for other people to make mistakes. His suit chimed softly. Damage, moderate. Ammunition, concerning. Morale, stubborn. Accurate, Marcus whispered. The first enemy scouts advanced cautiously, their movement careful, professional. They were used to overwhelming force, not uncertainty. Marcus watched them through a cracked visor feed, tracking patterns instead of bodies. They favored symmetry. He did not. He triggered a localized gravity spike just as one of them stepped forward. The alien slammed into the ground hard enough to dent armor. Marcus winced. That's gonna leave a mark. The others reacted instantly, firing into the ruins. Energy bolts carved glowing scars into stone. Marcus rolled, barely avoiding a shot that would have turned his left arm into a cautionary tale. He scrambled into a narrow corridor formed by collapsed architecture, too tight for larger bodies, perfect for someone considered inconveniently small. As he ran, he laughed once, breathless and sharp. Weak, remember? Very weak. Back aboard the command ship, the atmosphere was tense in a way Queen Veyra had not anticipated. The retreat had been executed flawlessly, yet unease lingered. She stood before the tactical display, watching Marcus's feed in a minimized window, more out of obligation than expectation. "He is still moving," one of her officers said, surprise slipping into their voice. "Of course he is," another replied dismissively. "For now." On the ground, Marcus slowed, pressed himself against a wall as enemy signals passed overhead. He rewired a broken beacon, turning it into a noisy, irritating distraction. The enemy responded exactly as predicted, splitting their forces. "Thank you for that," he murmured. He used their confusion to double back, placing charges sparingly. Human explosives lacked elegance but made up for it with enthusiasm. When the ground collapsed again, the enemy halted entirely. Minutes stretched into hours measured only by Marcus's internal clock and growing exhaustion. He was hit twice, once glancing, once painfully, but he adapted, shifting tactics with each injury. He talked to himself constantly, partly to stay focused, partly because silence invited fear. "Okay," he said after narrowly avoiding a fatal misstep. "New rule, no more heroics, or at least, fewer." On the ship, laughter had faded. The elite soldiers now stood closer to the display, ears angled forward. Marcus was no longer amusing. He was unsettling. He was improvising in ways their doctrine did not account for. "He's using the environment like a weapon," one soldier muttered. Queen Veyra said nothing. Her eyes followed the feed, noting how Marcus avoided direct confrontation, how he turned limitations into variables. She felt an unfamiliar sensation, something uncomfortably close to admiration. Below, Marcus finally ran out of clean tricks and began relying on dirty ones. He jammed sensors, faked injuries, let the enemy think they had him cornered. When they advanced, confident at last, he collapsed the corridor behind them and vanished forward instead. "Still here," he said aloud, voice hoarse. "Surprise." By the time reinforcements were cleared to deploy, the battlefield had changed shape entirely. The enemy advance was stalled, fractured, uncertain. Marcus collapsed behind cover as friendly signals finally pierced the chaos. He allowed himself one small, exhausted grin. "Told you," he whispered to no one in particular. "Optimism." And as the dropships descended once more, Queen Veyra watched the feat in silence, no longer seeing a weak human, but a soldier rewriting the meaning of strength, one impossible minute at a time. The third hour blurred into something Marcus could no longer neatly count. Time stretched, folded, then snapped back without warning, like the gravity fields around him. His suit stopped offering helpful updates and switched to terse alerts, as if even its software had grown tired of being ignored. He muted it. The enemy had adapted. That was the troubling part. They no longer advanced in clean formations or predictable sweeps. They learned slowly and clumsily, but they learned. Marcus respected that. Respect made you cautious. Fear made you sloppy. He crawled beneath a tilted slab of alloyed stone, its surface humming faintly with dormant alien circuitry. Above him, boots passed, heavy, deliberate. He held his breath, counting heartbeats, wondering briefly if alien hearts beat in similar rhythms or if that was another human-centric assumption that would get him killed someday. Probably not today. Hopefully not today. "All right," he whispered once they passed. "Round, I don't know. Who's winning?" He checked his remaining charges. 1. He checked his ammunition. Enough to be annoying, not enough to be confident. He checked his injuries. The leg wound had stiffened into a dull, insistent pain that complained every time he moved. He decided it was lucky. Pain meant still alive. Marcus pulled a small device from his belt, an improvised gravity anchor, jury-rigged from parts that had never intended to cooperate. Human engineering philosophy: if it fits badly but works, it's a success. He planted it near a fractured wall and smiled tiredly. "Please fall down," he told the structure. It obliged. The collapse sent shock waves through the ruins, scattering dust and confusion. Enemy fire erupted in response, unfocused and angry. Marcus rolled, barely clearing the edge, as debris slammed where he'd been moments earlier. "Too close," he said. "Very heroic, though." On the command ship, the silence had become oppressive. No one joked anymore. No one placed bets. The feed showed Marcus limping now, slower. Movements less crisp, but still deliberate. Still thinking. "He should be dead," one of the elite soldiers said quietly. "Yes," Queen Veyra replied. "He should be." Her tone was not dismissive. It was unsettled. She watched as Marcus doubled back again, using terrain they had dismissed as unusable. He lured enemies into narrow kill zones, not through firepower, but irritation. Small disruptions, false signals, just enough resistance to provoke pursuit. He was not winning. He was surviving with purpose. Down below, Marcus reached what he'd been hoping to avoid: open ground. A wide, unstable plaza where gravity misbehaved openly, lifting rubble in slow drifting arcs before slamming it down again. Crossing it would be dangerous. Staying was worse. He took a breath. "Okay," he said. "Let's be brave or stupid. Possibly both." He sprinted. The gravity shifted mid-stride. Marcus flew, not upward, not exactly, but sideways, crashing into a column hard enough to rattle his teeth. His vision blurred. Something cracked in his suit. He groaned, pushing himself upright as enemy fire stitched the air where he'd been moments before. "I am definitely complaining about this later," he muttered. He triggered his last charge, collapsing a hovering mass of debris into the plaza. The impact sent shockwaves through enemy ranks, buying seconds. Marcus used every one of them, limping toward cover, leaving a trail of blood he tried very hard not to look at. Back on the ship, Queen Veyra's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. She saw the blood now, saw the strain in his movements. Her soldiers saw it too. "Why does he not retreat?" someone asked. Veyra answered before she realized she was going to. "Because retreat would fail." The realization settled heavily. Marcus was not holding the line because he wished to. He was doing it because there was no other option left. Marcus finally reached shelter, a low, broken structure that hummed with residual energy. He collapsed inside it, breathing hard, laughing weakly despite himself. "Still here," he said aloud. "This is getting ridiculous." Enemy signals regrouped outside. They were cautious now, careful, respectful. He checked his weapon, hands shaking. He thought briefly of Earth, of training grounds that smelled like dust and sweat, of instructors who told him he wasn't the strongest, but refused to say he was useless. He smiled faintly. "Guess this is my thing," he said. "Endurance." The first enemy stepped into view, weapon raised. Marcus raised his own, heart pounding, mind racing, not with fear but calculation. Above, Queen Veyra leaned closer to the feed, long ears angled forward. She no longer watched out of obligation. She watched because she needed to understand. And below, battered and bleeding, Marcus steadied his aim, ready to prove yet again that survival was not about how hard you hit, but how long you refused to stop thinking. The fourth hour began with Marcus discovering that his suit had developed opinions. Specifically, it no longer approved of his life choices. Every movement triggered a low, irritated warning tone, as if the software were sighing. "Yes, I know," he whispered while adjusting his grip on the rifle. "We've discussed this. Poor decisions, hostile environment, questionable leadership. Please focus." The structure he'd taken shelter in was older than the surrounding ruins, its walls threaded with dormant alien circuitry that pulsed faintly, like a sleeping animal. The enemy lingered outside, no longer rushing. That worried him more than aggression. Curiosity, he'd learned, was lethal. He shifted position carefully, wincing as his injured leg protested. Blood loss was becoming less abstract and more personal. He tore a strip from his undersuit and tied it tight, hands shaking just enough to be annoying. "Not dying here," he told himself. "That would make them right." He tapped into the structure's systems, surprised when they answered. The interface was crude, ancient, but responsive. Someone long ago had built this place to withstand pressure, gravity, atmosphere, time. Marcus smiled faintly. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see what you can still do." Outside, one of the enemy soldiers advanced, cautious but confident, scanning for signs of movement. Marcus waited until the last possible second, then triggered a localized gravity inversion. The soldier floated upward with a startled sound, limbs flailing inelegantly. Marcus couldn't help it. He laughed. "Oh, that never gets old." The laughter turned into a cough that hurt far more than it should have. He swallowed it down, refocusing as the enemy reacted with disciplined efficiency, adjusting formations, firing into probable positions. Energy scorched the walls. The ancient structure groaned. "Hold together," Marcus said, patting the wall as if it could hear him. "You and me. Temporary alliance." On the command ship, the tactical room felt smaller than it had hours earlier. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder now, eyes fixed on the feed. No one spoke unless necessary. The image flickered occasionally, interference from the gravity distortions, but Marcus remained visible, stubbornly present. "He is wounded," an officer said unnecessarily. "Yes," Queen Veyra replied, "and still fighting." Her gaze lingered on the structure he'd occupied. She recognized it now, an old defensive relic, predating even her people's earliest records of the planet. He hadn't just stumbled into shelter. He had chosen it. "He's reading the battlefield," she murmured, almost to herself, as if it were a language. Back below, Marcus felt the structure shudder again. The enemy had brought heavier weapons. He was running out of clever ideas and time in equal measure. "Okay," he said quietly. "New plan. Be very annoying." He rerouted power again, not to attack, but to broadcast. He flooded enemy sensors with distorted echoes of himself. False heat signatures, phantom movements. To an outside observer, it looked like there were half a dozen humans darting through the ruins. "Surprise," he whispered. The enemy hesitated, split again, fired at shadows. Marcus moved during the confusion, limping through a narrow maintenance passage that scraped his armor raw. He emerged behind enemy lines, closer than he wanted to be, close enough to hear their communications. Tight, controlled, increasingly frustrated. One of them spoke sharply, voice carrying. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was universal. He leaned against a wall, breathing hard. "You sound like my old drill sergeant," he said softly. He also hated improvisation. A shot grazed his shoulder. He hissed, ducking back, returning fire more to distract than to harm. Every movement cost him now. Every second required negotiation with his own body. On the ship, a soldier clenched their fists. "He cannot keep this up." Queen Veyra did not look away. "No," she said, "but neither can they." She watched Marcus stagger, then steady himself. Watched him make decisions that were not brave, not glorious, but necessary. Her people valued strength, clarity, dominance. Marcus embodied something messier and far more resilient. Below, the enemy finally committed to a push. They surged forward in force, determined to end this irritation once and for all. Marcus saw it coming. He smiled tiredly. "All right," he said. "One last trick." He triggered the structure's core systems fully, overloading them. Gravity spiked wildly, the ruins screaming as physics briefly lost interest in consistency. Enemy soldiers were thrown off balance, formations dissolving into chaos. Marcus ran, not fast, not gracefully, but with purpose, drawing them after him, leading them away from the extraction corridor. He collapsed behind cover at the far edge of the battlefield, vision swimming, breath ragged. The enemy slowed, cautious again, uncertain. "Still here," he whispered, "still thinking." Above him, unseen, Queen Veyra exhaled slowly, long ears angled forward, watching a human soldier do what her strongest warriors could not. And for the first time, the thought unsettled her, not because it challenged her authority, but because it felt true. By the time the fifth hour arrived, Marcus had stopped thinking of the battle as a sequence of moments and started treating it like weather. It came in waves, pressure, release, pressure again. And his job was not to stop it, only to stand where it broke. He lay on his back for a few seconds longer than was sensible, staring up at a sky that refused to decide which way was down. Chunks of stone drifted overhead like indecisive thoughts. His suit gave up on polite warnings and switched to a single blinking indicator that seemed to mean everything from "seek medical attention" to "you are an idiot." "Noted," Marcus whispered. Strong feedback. He rolled onto his side very carefully because his body had begun filing formal complaints. His leg felt like it belonged to someone else, someone much older and deeply unhappy. His shoulder burned. His mouth tasted like copper and recycled air. Still alive, though. That counted. Enemy movement signatures pulsed at the edge of his display. Slower now, more deliberate. They had learned something important. Rushing the human was a mistake. Marcus took a strange, weary pride in that. "Look at us," he murmured. "Mutual respect. Who says interspecies relations are hard?" He pushed himself up and limped toward a fractured overlook that gave him a view of the extraction corridor in the distance. The corridor still held. Barely. That was the point. As long as it held, the enemy couldn't follow Queen Veyra's troops. As long as it held, this madness mattered. Back aboard the command ship, time had taken on a different texture. It no longer flowed. It hovered. Queen Veyra stood unmoving before the display, her long ears angled forward in a posture her soldiers rarely saw. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of systems and the distant echo of Marcus's breathing through the feed. "He is deteriorating," one of the elites said, voice low. "Yes," Veyra replied, "and adapting." They watched as Marcus dismantled a piece of alien technology he should not have understood, repurposing it with clumsy precision. He used parts of his own suit to stabilize it, then leaned back to admire his work. On the feed, he grinned weakly. "Don't worry," he said to no one. "I voided the warranty." The soldiers exchanged looks, some confusion, some disbelief, something else, uncomfortably close to admiration. Below, Marcus activated the device. It emitted a low-frequency pulse that resonated with the gravity field, smoothing it just enough in a narrow band to allow movement, his movement. The enemy hesitated again, their sensors arguing with reality. "Still thinking," Marcus said. "That's the trick." He moved through the band, firing only when necessary, never staying in one place long enough to be predictable. Every step hurt, every breath felt earned. He made a game of it in his head because despair was heavy and humor traveled light. "Okay," he muttered after narrowly avoiding another hit. "If I survive this, I'm taking a very long vacation somewhere with boring physics." The enemy finally tried something new. They stopped advancing altogether. They spread out, encircling the ruins, cutting off Marcus's avenues of retreat. It was smart, Marcus noticed immediately. "Well," he said softly, "that's inconvenient." He ducked into a low trench, checking his last remaining resources. No charges, minimal ammo, a handful of improvised tools, and a mind that refused to stop spinning. He closed his eyes for a second. Just one. In that second, he thought of the jokes the elite soldiers had made, the polite laughter, the certainty that he would break first. He opened his eyes again. "Still here," he whispered. On the ship, Queen Veyra felt something tighten in her chest, a sensation she did not have a word for. She had seen countless battles. She had commanded overwhelming force. She had never watched a single soldier hold a war together with refusal alone. "He is not strong," one soldier said quietly. "No," Veyra answered. "He is relentless." The enemy tightened the circle. Marcus felt it closing, pressure building. He could retreat deeper into the ruins, but that would abandon the corridor. He could make a final stand here. Neither option felt heroic. Both felt necessary. He chose the third. Marcus stood up and stepped into the open. Enemy weapons snapped toward him instantly. He raised his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in invitation. He activated every remaining system at once. Sensors, beacons, distorted signals, flooding the battlefield with noise. To the enemy, it looked like chaos. To Marcus, it was rhythm. "Come on," he said under his breath. "You wanted me." They fired. He moved, not fast but clever, using gravity spikes to redirect shots, using debris as moving cover, using the enemy's caution against them. He was no longer defending ground. He was shaping attention. Minutes passed. Long, brutal minutes. Then a new signal cut through the chaos. Friendly, heavy, close. Marcus sagged against a pillar, laughing weakly. "Took you long enough," he said to the air. On the command ship, Queen Veyra straightened as reinforcements appeared on the display. Around her, her elite soldiers exhaled as one. Marcus slid down to the ground, vision dimming. He stayed conscious just long enough to see the enemy retreat at last. "Still held," he whispered, and allowed himself to rest. Above him, Queen Veyra watched the human soldier who had rewritten her understanding of war. Not with strength, not with dominance, but with stubborn intelligence and a refusal to be what others expected. And she knew, with unsettling certainty, that nothing in her army would ever be the same again. Marcus woke to the deeply suspicious sensation of not being dead. This annoyed him. He lay still for several seconds, conducting a careful inventory, ceiling, unfamiliar, softly glowing, not actively collapsing. Air, breathable, faintly floral, possibly judgmental. Body, heavy, sore, present. He murmured, alive. A pause, then thoughtfully, "That's inconvenient." The bed responded by adjusting itself, rising slightly and wrapping a field of warm pressure around his injuries. His suit was gone. That worried him until he remembered it had been one bad decision, away from filing a restraining order against his spine. A figure moved into his peripheral vision. Queen Veyra did not announce herself. She simply existed at the edge of the room, tall, composed, long ears angled in a neutral position that Marcus now understood meant alert restraint rather than indifference. He squinted at her. "If this is an interrogation," he said hoarsely, "I'd like to formally request water and a lawyer, or at least water." Her lips curved slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to make his brain pause. "You were unconscious for 12 standard cycles," she said. "You have been stabilized. Your survival probability is now acceptable." "High praise," Marcus replied. "I'll put it on my resume." She studied him in silence. The quiet felt different now, not dismissive, evaluative. "You held the position for 4 hours and 17 minutes, Veyra said, "against a force my elite unit assessed as overwhelming." Marcus frowned. Was it really that long? Yes. Huh, he said. Felt longer. He tried to shift, failed, and settled for sighing. So, am I in trouble for everything? For disobeying standard tactical doctrine? She asked. For redefining it on the fly, he corrected. Very rude of me. Another pause. Then unexpectedly, Veyra gave a short, sharp exhale that might have been laughter if Marcus hadn't been careful. You are, she said. Difficult to categorize. Story of my life. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the fine details of her features, the subtle patterning along her skin, the faint scars at the base of one ear. Not decorative, earned. My soldiers are unsettled, Veyra continued. They train for centuries to embody strength. You undermine that definition in a single afternoon. Marcus winced. Sorry, reflex. You fought while injured. Yes. You refused retreat. Yes. You made jokes. Look, Marcus said earnestly, if I stop joking, that's when you should worry. Her gaze sharpened at that. Something thoughtful flickered there. You did not win through force, she said. You did not overpower the enemy. No, Marcus agreed. I annoyed them into giving up. That earned him a real smile this time. Brief, but unmistakable. Outside the recovery chamber, Veyra's elite soldiers waited. They stood differently now, less loose, less confident. When Marcus was wheeled out later, upright but restrained by medical fields, conversation stopped entirely. He raised a weak hand. Hey! No one laughed. That bothered him more than the pain. One of the soldiers stepped forward, the one who had first questioned his armor. The long ears dipped slightly, not submissive, but respectful. You should not have survived, the soldier said. Marcus considered that. Yeah, he replied. That seems to be a recurring review. Veyra turned to her troops. Her voice carried without effort. You assumed physical dominance equaled combat superiority, she said. You withdrew because the battlefield no longer favored you. He remained because adaptation favored him. No one spoke. You will review this engagement, she continued, not to praise the human, but to correct yourselves. Marcus coughed. I'm fine with praise too. Just saying. A few ears twitched. One soldier almost smiled. Almost. Later, alone again, Marcus stared at the ceiling, exhaustion finally catching up. The bed hummed softly, recalibrating. His body ached in the satisfying way that meant he'd earned the right to complain. Queen Veyra returned once more before he slept. You will recover, she said. When you do, I would have you speak to my officers, not as a symbol, as an instructor. Marcus blinked. You want me to teach your elite soldiers? Yes. About what? He asked. She tilted her head. How to survive when strength fails. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, tired but genuine. Well, he said, first lesson's easy. Oh? Never underestimate someone just because they look breakable. Veyra inclined her head. Agreement, respect. As she left, Marcus let his eyes close at last. Still alive, he thought. Still thinking. And somehow, impossibly, still changing the rules. Marcus learned two things during recovery. The first was that alien medical technology was extremely effective and deeply judgmental. Every time he attempted to stand before the field allowed it, the bed emitted a soft chime that felt less like a warning and more like disappointment. The second was that reputation traveled faster than dropships. By the time he was cleared to walk, slowly, under supervision, and with a limp he pretended not to notice, the corridor outside the medical wing had developed an audience. Queen Veyra's elite soldiers no longer clustered with casual confidence. They stood straighter now, quieter, their long ears angled toward him not in curiosity, but attention. Marcus stopped, glanced around and sighed. I should start charging for this. No one laughed. Then one soldier did. Just once. It sounded strange in the sterile corridor, like a foreign object finding its place. The training chamber had been reconfigured at Veyra's command. Gone were the open spaces designed for displays of strength and speed. In their place rose uneven terrain, shifting gravity fields, broken sight lines, and unpredictable environmental hazards. It looked, Marcus thought, a lot like the ruins he had nearly died in. Queen Veyra stood at the observation platform, hands folded behind her back. She watched Marcus enter with measured calm. "You requested this configuration," Marcus said, squinting at a floating slab of stone that refused to decide whether it was floor or ceiling. "I did," Veyra replied. "You survived it. They should learn from it." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "You're really committing to this." "I do not reform doctrine lightly," she said, "but I reform it thoroughly." The first exercise was simple. The elite soldiers were instructed to cross the chamber using standard tactics. They failed, repeatedly. Gravity shifts disrupted their momentum. Narrow passages restricted their formations. Their frustration was satisfying. Marcus leaned on a railing, watching. "Okay," he said eventually. "Now do it wrong." They looked at him. "On purpose," he added. "Break formation. Get messy. Argue with the room." That earned confused looks, a few skeptical ear flicks. Then slowly, they tried. One soldier crawled instead of ran. Another used debris as moving cover. A third stopped entirely, observing instead of acting. They crossed. Queen Veyra felt something settle into place as she watched. This was not weakness. This was versatility. Later, alone with Marcus on the observation deck, she spoke quietly. "You have altered more than training methods." He shrugged. "Happens when you don't die." "You have altered perception," she corrected. "My soldiers no longer measure worth by strength alone. They measure awareness, adaptation, endurance." Marcus smiled faintly. "About time." She turned to him fully. "And you?" He considered that. He felt different. Not stronger, not braver, but clearer. "I used to think surviving meant staying unnoticed," he said. "Turns out sometimes you survive by being impossible to ignore." Veyra inclined her head. "You were called weak." "Still am," Marcus said easily. "Just use it better now." The final ceremony was small, intentional. No banners, no spectacle. Queen Veyra addressed her forces plainly, acknowledging error without defensiveness, reform without apology. Marcus stood at her side, uncomfortable but present. "You showed us the cost of assumption," Veyra said to him, her voice carrying, "and the value of minds that do not mirror our own." She extended a hand, not as ruler to subject, but as soldier to soldier. Marcus hesitated only a second before taking it. Her grip was firm, steady. "Try not to get killed," she added quietly. "No promises," he replied, "but I'll keep thinking." When his transfer back to human command was finally approved, the departure felt heavier than he expected. The elite soldiers watched in silence as he boarded the shuttle. One stepped forward at the last moment. "The battlefield no longer frightens us in the same way," the soldier said. "That is inconvenient." Marcus grinned. "You're welcome." As the shuttle lifted, Queen Veyra remained at the viewport. Long ears relaxed now, gaze thoughtful. She had lost nothing. She had gained perspective. And somewhere between gravity failures, stubborn endurance, and a human who refused to break quietly, her empire had become stronger in a way no doctrine had predicted. Marcus leaned back in his seat, exhaustion settling deep but gentle. Still alive, still thinking, and no longer willing to let anyone define strength for him ever again.